Greetings and salutations, guys. Rad Dreams here with Rad Dreams here on YouTube as well as Rad Dreams on Twitch. And recently, Forbes has announced that The Odyssey is the highest grossing rated R film of all time. So I figured what better time than now to share my thoughts on the film, because I haven't yet. I've written my review and posted it on my personal Facebook page. I know I'm a boomer, but I have not shared my thoughts with you guys. So I figured let's do it. Let's rip off that Band-Aid. So let's go ahead and talk about Christopher Nolan's take on The Odyssey from this year. So let me tell you guys, and let me tell you true. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey isn't really what you would expect. You know, if you're walking into this film expecting a truly faithful adaptation of the original text by Homer, you will leave disappointed. Also, if you're expecting a quote-unquote historically accurate depiction of the time period in which this epic takes place, you will also leave disappointed. You have to remember, we are dealing with mythology here. So for it to be quote-unquote accurate is kind of a misnomer, because it's fiction. It's made up. So with that being said, his version of this timeless epic is more so a modern retelling that uses the skeleton of the classic version, done by Homer. So it's updated with easily digestible dialogue and language for the present day audience. And there's multiple elements regarding that original that are either cut or altered to better suit this modern day audience. And you may believe that all of these are negatives upon hearing that. But this reinterpretation of the Odyssey through this modern lens is honestly a fantastic viewing experience with only really minor grievances in my eyes, both as a critic and as a personal fan of the original. So there is a bit of disclaimer though with this review, because I watched the film as it was intended in IMAX in the 70 millimeter screening, which only a few exist in the entire world. Luckily, one just opened up by me. So there's I think around 40 or so worldwide. But anyways, if you do end up watching it in theater, I highly recommend watching it in 70 millimeter or in just regular IMAX rather than a standard showing, because it was filmed strictly using IMAX cameras. So you want to view it through the lens in which Christopher Nolan has intended. You'll achieve the best viewing experience that way. So now that preamble is out of the way, the reason why this version is so good through both that critical lens and a personal one is its combination of cinematography, its sound design, visuals, story structure, and acting. Nolan, he was able to achieve an almost perfect film. And through the course of this review, each category that I just went over will be covered, and we'll discuss why these particular aspects stand out. So let's dive right into the cinematography, okay? So it is really impossible to discuss The Odyssey without mentioning how it was shot. As I said earlier, it was done in IMAX. It fully utilized the 70 millimeter technology, which is old. It's older, I should say. And I can't really envision any other way for it to be done after witnessing it. And due to the grandiose nature of the movie, this was kind of necessary. It did also utilize a multitude of real locations, real props, and real people to represent, extras that appeared on the screen. It very, very rarely relied on CG. It did not utilize it as much, which is very cool. The usage of these real locations as well as nature perfectly captured the visceral gravity of each situation that our characters in this film found themselves in. The pounding of the waves, the calm of the storm and the destructive sacking of Troy are just a few examples of how it was filmed in such an effective way. And two particular scenes really stand out to me in terms of expertly crafted moments. They combine the visual effects and fantastic camera angles, excuse me, to really coalesce in such a phenomenal scene. And the first of which is, the escape from the Cyclops. It utilized a 60-foot puppet, literally, with interwoven CG effects, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but I'm pretty sure they utilized very minimal CG when it came to the Cyclops scene. And the sheer fear of that moment really left me in awe. And to really capture that gargantuan creature, he implemented like this downward camera angle that tilted up while the giant was attacking Odysseus and his men. Then while escaping for their lives, the camera, it panned outwards and instituted a bit of a screen blur, all the while capturing the Cyclops chasing them from the cave towards their boat, right? They're running towards the beach. And the next scene, in my eyes, which is the best scene in the film, is the interaction between the men and the witch goddess Circe. So this one moment, while it is my favorite, I did also have issue with it. This is where Nolan made some creative changes from the original text. In this version, she was more so presented as a powerful witch and not so much a goddess. She was also not displayed as beautiful or alluring as she was, just depicted in the writings of Homer. In this interpretation, she was fairly haggard and plain. And the way she lured the men in Nolan's depiction was with, food and shelter, whereas in the text it was more so with, beauty and guile. So the other thing that was shifted was how Odysseus and his men eventually escaped from her clutches. Instead of ingesting the magical plant of Mole, Odysseus ingesting it from the god Hermes, Odysseus instead threatened her sister that was turned into a bird that was in a cage. And there are other changes with this interaction as well, but for the purposes of brevity here, I'll leave it at that. But let's circle back to how the scene played out and why I think it is the best scene and why it's done so masterfully. It utilizes really quick cuts and shifts of the camera angle from man to man as Circe systematically changes them into pigs. And this was done with zero CG. This was all practical effects. And it was very reminiscent of body horror. It really almost paid homage to, Cronenberg, right? It was very Cronenberg-esque, if that makes sense. And I mean this in the best way possible, too. And it just really stood out to me as horrific and just really skin tingling and skin crawling, right? it really left an impression on me. It honestly was that good. And when it comes to the visuals, I touched on the brief usage of real life locations as well as nature, and I really want to expand on that. So the combination of these two things really show the severity as well as the magnitude of each situation. The multiple moments where the men are being berated by the storm of the sea were crafted with such poise. It really truly felt like you were there suffering with them. And then during the sacking of Troy, there was minimal CG usage. They used actual fire and destruction. As an audience member, you were experiencing the rages of war. And in some films, war is romanticized, but in the Odyssey, we're lulled into this false sense of jubilation during the initial display of the downfall of Troy. But then later, we're given a different perspective through the eyes of Odysseus, that war is anything but glorious. It is truly ugly and brutal. And this really segues nicely into the story structure and how it was written in this interpretation. So in Homer's writing, it was more so focused on one man's mission to get home to his wife and be with his family once more. But in this reinterpretation, we are instead shown one's man reluctance to go home because he believes he is not worthy of his return due to the atrocities that he has committed through his time away. And this is really reinforced through very visceral depictions of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short, through the perspective of Odysseus. And one of the ways it does this is through the manifestation or the hallucination, if you will, of Athena. Instead of being an actual goddess incarnate, she instead assumes the visage of a young girl that is slain in Troy. And she represents, in my opinion, Odysseus's guilt, shame, and regret. And this is reinforced through the main theme of the film, which is of forgiveness and redemption rather than romance. And in Nolan's version, these themes are quite gritty and traumatic. Even with the dialogue that I mentioned earlier, that was updated, does accomplish this. Instead of being verbose and poetic, it is more so simplified and provides an instantaneous register of emotion for the audience. Rather than relying on intellectualism, it does shift its focus towards a more emotional and kind of gut feeling response. And these sort of emotions would not have been able to be registered with the audience if it wasn't for the acting, which across the board is done very well. In terms of performances that stand out, there are 4 that immediately come to mind. First, obviously, is Matt Damon as the main character of Odysseus. Second of which is Penelope, played by Anne Hathaway. And third of which is the son Telemachus, played by Tom Holland. And finally, we have Antinous, played by my boy, Robert Pattinson. Pour one out for him. He's not dead, but no, seriously, let's cheers to Robert Pattinson. He is truly on a generational run right now. Phenomenal. I just cannot gush more about him. He's come such a long way from Twilight, and I'm here for it. I am absolutely here for it. And then I would say an honorable mention should definitely go to John Leguizamo, if I'm pronouncing that right, who played Emmaus, who was the pig farmer or swineherder. So most of these actors, with the exception of Holland, are very seasoned veterans of the craft. They've been around for quite a while. And the reason I don't give that distinction to Holland is because, he's still fairly young, but that doesn't negate his performance. He did a phenomenal job of portraying Telemachus. The interaction with him and his father, where it was revealed they finally reunited with one another, was a tearjerker for sure. I was crying in the theater. And the script writing of that scene, as well as the delivery by both Damon and Holland, really, really pulls on those heartstrings. And you could legitimately believe that they were father and son in this moment that haven't seen one another in 20 years. And when it comes to Anne Hathaway as Penelope, they did change up her characterization from the original text. In the original, she was more so kind of depressed lover, if you will, very forlorn. She was quite crafty in the original, and she is in this as well. But in this version of Nolan's, she was given much more agency and purpose. She presented a lot more emotion when she interacted with her son, almost displaying a sort of contempt. Not so much for Telemachus, but rather the situation in which they found themselves in. And when it comes to Pattinson, he is the main antagonist of Antinous, where he is able to portray such a contemptible cur, I love that word, in such a conniving fashion. Or excuse me, convincing. He was conniving, but he was very convincing in his performance. You have to pardon that little slip there. But he's a truly, truly, truly a scoundrel if you have ever witnessed one on the silver screen. The scene that really stood out to me was when the suitors were trying to kill Odysseus, and Antinous was, screaming from the back, giving orders, and hiding from the actual conflict itself, really pressing home the idea that he is a coward and lacks honor. And finally, when it comes to the swineherder, I really enjoyed his heavy involvement in this rendition because, in the original text, he also had quite the hand in ensuring that Odysseus returned home. He played a pivotal role in both versions. And John, he was really able to give the air of a wise mentor and a faithful servant. And the last category that I wanted to touch on is the use of sound and just sound design for the film. The examples that I wanted to highlight for this is the motif of the bow pluck. I'm sure y'all have been seeing the meme going around where people pull up a string and just boom. But the bow pluck, the overall score, and the scene where Odysseus and his men encounter the sirens is another one in particular that I really want to hammer home to you guys. So it's established early on in the film that Odysseus plucks his bow as a sort of warning before he hunts his prey. It's his way of showing respect and honor, which does coincide with the theme of redemption. He is a character that wants to get back to the version of himself where he has that honor and that prestige and that soundness of character. This plucking of the bow is utilized in the overall score as well as multiple impactful scenes. And it just really, really reinforces the core elements that we've been talking about. With the encounter of the sirens, there is zero dialogue whatsoever, and it utilizes a very, very beautiful score motif, all the while showing the audience Odysseus' suffering. He's screaming out in agony. His cries literally fall on deaf ears because not only does the audience not hear his cry, but his men cannot either because they all have beeswax in their ears to protect them from the siren song. And lastly, with the just overall score in general, it utilizes a contemporary, almost classical music motif to capture the fantastical as well as horrifying events of what these characters are going through. And without the score, you're not going to be able to reinforce those moments and just really hammer them in. And the last section of the review that I'm going to cover with you guys is the minor grievances that I do have for the movie overall, which is why I said at the beginning it's a almost perfect film. One of the main grievances I had was the departure of certain elements from the original writing. The ones that really stood out to me was the complete retelling of the Calypso interaction. Instead of Odysseus regaling the king of Phaeacia with his tale, that whole section of the story is completely cut out and replaced with him remembering his exploits and telling them to Calypso. And she wasn't really represented as a goddess either, although it is inferred. And what's also different is contained in this Calypso interaction too, is that he's trapped on her island for 7 years. That remains the same, but the part where she falls in love with Odysseus and wanted to marry him also does stay. But the part of her wanting to make him immortal was removed. In conjunction with this, the portion of the story about the Lotus Eaters was replaced with Calypso feeding the lotus flower to Odysseus to ease his PTSD, to almost make him forget about his suffering, or at least ease his suffering, thus really reinforcing the message of him not wanting to go home due to the fact that he doesn't feel worthy. In the original, the gods did have much more of a role and a very heavy hand in terms of their involvement in progressing the story. Whereas in this version, they served as kind of subtle, unseen forces. In the original, they are personified. They are given form. This is not so much a complaint, though. It's rather a commentary. I did enjoy how Poseidon and Zeus were depicted. The portion with Zeus that I really enjoyed the most was the implementation and usage of Zeus's law throughout the entire story, as well as the thunderclaps and lightning strikes almost in response to certain moments. The other aspect that I was a little bit upset about was the removal of the dialogue with the Cyclops himself. In most versions of the Odyssey, Odysseus uses clever wordplay to escape from the Cyclops. He tells the Cyclops that his name is No Man or Nobody, and uses this to kind of get a leg up on in the Cyclops, because when the Cyclops tells his brethren, hey, this is who hurt me. It was nobody, or no man hurt me. His, I guess, fellow Cyclops say, hey, if nobody hurt you, then shut up, so to speak. But it was interesting how they did this, though. But it was quite the Herculean feat to use this wordplay in a modern retelling, especially with like the dialogue, because it would not feel natural. But I'm just saying it would have been nice to see that. And the last thing that really was interesting to me and was a huge change was the usage of the character Sinon, played by Elliot Page. The reason why I say this is interesting is because in any version of the Odyssey and the Iliad, this character does not make an appearance. He comes around in a different story and tells you about his involvement. Yet in this film, he plays a very crucial role in the fall of Troy. This character does, like I mentioned, make his first appearance in the text of the Aeneid. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Aeneid. I would also kind of be remiss if I failed to mention that there is a lack of Greek representation in the movie with the casting of actors. That would have been nice to see. It didn't really detract, but it just would have been a nice tip of the hat to have more Greek actors in the movie. So in the movie, Sinon does not have any knowledge of the trick of the wooden horse, which we should all be familiar with. It's the Trojan horse. However, in the text version, he is the one that does trick the Trojans and does have knowledge of this clever ploy. I don't really know why in the film he was left in the dark. I'm not sure if his character really would have revealed the strategy if he did have prior knowledge. Again, this is a minor grievance. I did enjoy how the Trojan horse was done in the movie. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was done very well. It was just interesting to see that this character was a crucial plot point in the film, whereas in the Iliad and the Odyssey, he was removed. And even though the film was just about 3 hours long, I didn't really feel like it. It almost felt a tad expeditious, like very fast. And I felt like it could have used a little bit more room to breathe to allow a more kind of effective flow of the story. In my eyes, I think the film honestly could have been broken up in 2 parts, part 1 and part 2, and could have really disseminated that message more streamlined. It possibly could have ended where Odysseus got marooned on Calypso's isle, or maybe it could have ended when he escaped. Either that, or I think it could have worked maybe when he arrived on the shore of his homeland, right? But who knows? Who knows? I'm just spitballing here. So I do think it possibly could have worked out had it been broken up. But regardless, the film was told with the entirety of the story intact while cutting out those portions that I mentioned earlier. The ending, though, while it was solid, it did deviate from the original in that Odysseus was exiled and he did leave Ithaca with his wife Penelope, and Telemachus took the throne as king. I didn't mind this at all. It was just a little jarring because I'm so used to the original. But overall, the film did have a lot more positive attributes than negative ones, and I would regard it as a must-watch, especially in IMAX on the big screen at the bare minimum. So overall, I think I would give the Odyssey a solid 9 out of 10, and I can understand why it is now the highest grossing rated R film of all time. So let me know in the comments below if you agree with my review, if you have questions, comments, concerns, like what did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Please let me know in the comments. And if you like this type of content, let me know. Feel free to like and subscribe. And I hope you guys stay safe out there. And above all else, I do hope that you stay rad. Take care, guys. Bye.